Some food for thought before we call up the next panel. When they say Ireland is there are no strangers here, only friends we haven't yet met. Ireland is very, very small. This idea of 6 degrees of connection, in Ireland it's very often 2 degrees, very often even 1 degree. I shouldn't be saying this, but we're in Limerick. We'll edit this out after. But I recall, I first met Alan when I was Ireland's first CEO of the Regulatory Compliance Association in Financial Services. And I met Alan, who kindly spoke at our events when we were dealing with the global regulators. And what was very, very interesting, it is such a small world. When we started Asia Matters, Pat Breen, who from Clare, Pat was the chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee, so we happened to be giving a briefing in Dáil Éireann, our government. And as I left the committee room, I met Alan coming out of the other room because the government had appointed him as a public interest chairman of a toxic bank to try and rescue it, create transparency. But the person next to him was my youngest brother, who was the lead tribunal investigator for the government. And it was one of those moments I came out and I actually said, I'm not talking to either of you. And I just walked away. So there are times, much as we believe in partnership, you shouldn't actually talk to people at all. You know? So could I ask the next panel to take their seats, please? It's Jean Carberry, it's Leo McAdams, Colin Moran, Margaret Lawler from Nexus, and Conor O'Sullivan. And if you would take your seats, please, here on the stage. And could I call up my colleague Cathal Lee from Asia Matters, who will chair this session. Cathal, over to you.
Thank you, Martin, for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone. My name is Cathal Lee. I'm proud to be an advisory board member of Asia Matters and also chair of the Asia Business Sentiment Committee. And for the last 20 years or so, I've been involved in public and corporate affairs, working in Parliament, working with businesses, working with industry, and working at that point of where people meet and form partnerships. Your Excellencies, Chairman Alan Dukes, members of Asia Matters and friends, the overall context in terms of scaling and innovation is the theme for today. And in fairness, as the Minister outlined and Pat before him, scaling and innovation are concepts, but when the detail is actually put in place, that's when you can have the impact for individuals, for the region, for the country, and indeed individual businesses. We're joined today for an expert panel on funding and venture capital priorities, but I suppose the context here, yesterday we were fortunate, as Martin mentioned earlier, we're fortunate to hear about the story of two very different businesses. One 125-year-old business headquartered in Chicago, and the other less than a year old, headquartered in University of Limerick. But what unites those two businesses or stories is that almost every other business, there's the same criteria in which to operate, or the same criteria in which to start. You need an idea, whether it's a product or service. You need a team with skills. You need to have a stable or helpful regulatory environment. And the fourth is you need access to funding, whether it's self-funding, state funding, or venture capital, or private investment. So this morning's panel will actually cover all of those elements in terms of a business from inception through to scaling. And the people involved today have unique experience in this. But I was reading the global CEO survey from PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, and they said that 45% of CEOs globally believe their company will not exist, will not be viable in 10 years if they stay on the current path. So this is actually where innovation kicks in. This is where that idea of funding kicks in terms of scaling, in terms of repositioning. So our panel of speakers, and what we're going to do first is we're going to start with Jean. I'd like to spend a little time with Jean because of her role within the Department of Enterprise. When I spoke earlier about that stable political regulatory environment, This is the area that Jean and her colleagues are responsible for. Many on the panel are responsible for implementing that policy, and of course many of you in the room. So Jean, what I'd like to talk about is the domestic venture capital sector and the policy positions that as a government and as a department you've been instrumental in leading and also in working with others. Jean.
Thanks, Cathal. So I'd like to start with a couple of key messages before I start going through the different supports we do. So the first thing is that Ireland is a very good place for startups. And if there's anyone in the audience who wants to start a new business, has an innovative idea, this is the perfect place to begin, because government for the last 30, 40 years has been laser focused on providing a supportive environment for startups, soft supports available through Enterprise Ireland and the LEOs, and then various things and interventions we've done to unlock finance. That includes, but is not just, grants, and a big part of what we do is stimulating the seed and venture capital market. And the second message that I'd like to land today is that Ireland is a great place to invest. If you have a long time horizon, and if you have money that you would like to invest in businesses, this is the perfect place. I believe that we have not been vocal enough about how successful we have been in creating a very strong pipeline of startups and how profitable those investments are. So, as a government official, I look at these things through the lens of economic return. So our investment in startups and scale-ups has a very strong economic return. It generates jobs, it generates economic activity. But for investors, the financial returns are, as my kids would say, awesome. And indeed, we are one of the only government departments that more or less pays for ourselves, because of the phenomenal returns that the various investments, both the direct investments that Enterprise Ireland make, and then the returns that we get through our seed and venture capital scheme. So the model with seed and venture capital is that we crowd in private investors. There's a lot of, in addition to the finance element of it, there's a lot of benefits, because the venture capital investors provide discipline. The market discipline, we feel, is very important for businesses, and they also provide a lot of management support, and I'm sure Leo will go into this in much more detail. But we've had a lot of success in this area, but I have a few comments around where we want to go next with it. Firstly, a lot of our focus has been on developing the market, the domestic market of venture firms, and also attracting in international investors. The domestic firms have grown, and that sector has grown considerably since Enterprise Ireland and government first began this programme in the 90s. But we would like to see a higher risk appetite among the domestic market, and we would also like to see larger deal sizes. We've been looking very closely for the last year, working with a number of stakeholders on how we can take things to the next level. So as I say, we have been very, very successful in the startup and early stage companies, but now our focus is very much on scaling. So Carl, do you want to go on, or do you want to ask me some
one of the
questions?
things that you and I discussed previously was about how scaling is itself a core pillar of what you're doing. I think you stole some of Leo's great points for later with the great success that they're having, but the truth is, it does require that policy landscape to not just incentivise the likes of Enterprise Ireland and Atlantic Bridge and others, but to keep them on their toes with international competition, because that's the key point in terms of the success.
Well, that's it. What we don't want is a cosy cartel that's underpinned by government. So we're Ireland. That's why I want to get this message out. Ireland is very attractive for international investors. We're moving now on to very much focusing on incentivising scaling. So we're looking at 3 pillars. One will be government funding. So we're looking to capture a pool of government funding that we will then use as a cornerstone to crowd in private investment. The second pillar to this is tax, because obviously tax is a very important lever that government has at its disposal. So we're looking at what kind of tax incentives would be useful in this space. And then the third thing is looking at how we can unlock private institutional capital. So there are big pools of capital in the pension funds, in the banks, and indeed now that we're moving into new generations of Irish domestic wealthy, we want to do what they've done very successfully in other countries, which is attracting in the private wealth funds and getting those to invest in businesses, because in Ireland there tends to be too much of a focus on property, and there's no better return for the long term than as you all know, than investing in enterprise and in business and the ideas of the future.
Great. That's a fascinating insight. But one of the things that some of you may not know is that Jean previously worked in the USA in a ratings agency. And you're probably regretting telling me this now, but one of the things as a company, they had to pivot because the market changed. And there's a great lesson, I think, in that story for businesses, for partners, in terms of that type of partnering and innovation into the future. Any lessons that you could share with us from that, Jean?
Okay, well, it's a story I really like because it illustrates the importance of strategic foresight. So I worked for Standard & Poor's in the 90s in New York, and Standard & Poor's for many years had been a subsidiary of McGraw-Hill, and they'd made quite a lot of money out of what became a commodity product, which was generating investment research, which brokers would then use to attract in clients as sell-side brokers. So then there was a deregulation of that market in the 70s, and suddenly those reports of Standard & Poor's were able to sell at a huge markup. No longer were important because the brokers were now competing on price and not on value add. So there was, in a dusty corner of the office on Wall Street, there was a group of wonks who were doing ratings of companies, bond ratings. And the people in the boardroom realised that there could be some money to be made out of this. And in fact, the margins on bond ratings are massive, and Standard & Poor's became the engine of growth for McGraw-Hill, which became the poor relation. And so that's a really nice illustration of the fact that things are changing all the time, and businesses really need to have their eye on the ball and look at what's the next. And Meta is another good example. They were looking at the metaverse a couple of years ago, and we heard all about that. Well, they've completely pivoted now into not completely pivoted, but they've done a big pivot into the Gen AI, and that's where all their investment is going. So businesses really need to have their eye on the ball and on the strategic future, and indeed government as well. So with my other hat, I am the head of AI policy in the department. And I can tell you that Gen AI is going to eat a lot of people's lunch and is going to cause a huge amount of disruption in the next couple of years. So that's just one example of where almost all businesses need to be looking out at what are the opportunities, how do I need to change, how do I need to pivot. And so working with Enterprise Ireland and working with our other partners, we are preparing for this, and we're making sure that there are supports and assistance, etc., there for businesses as they do those pivots and as they invest in the future.
I think that's an appropriate time to jump on to Leo McAdams from Enterprise Ireland. Leo is the divisional manager within the investment services team with Enterprise Ireland. There's probably nobody as well versed in terms of the actual practical application of venture capital and support from the ground up. And just when we were speaking earlier, Leo, you mentioned the incredible partnering initiative that is a medium to long-term opportunity as well as the day-to-day opportunity with venture capital. You might remind us just how active Enterprise Ireland are in venture capital and some of the standout elements for yourself and your team.
Sure. So just to say, Limerick is obviously very much in the scaling world, because this is my second time down in Limerick in the last week talking about or being at some session around scaling. So that's great to see. So in terms of Enterprise Ireland and our involvement in funding, so we're involved both on the direct side and on the indirect side. So Enterprise Ireland invests equity directly into startups primarily. And the reason we do that, and going back to Jean's points around policy, is because that's where we see market failure. But one thing that we are seeing is that market failure that used to be very, very early is now actually kind of Series A and beyond and into scaling. So one of kind of the pivots that we're doing as an organization is moving from just that focus of really early stage, where we're into high potential startups and pre-seed. So our quantums can be from 100K to about 250K. We're now looking more at actually we need to follow on, and we need to follow on again. So that's that continuum of funding for companies as they go from startup to scale. So that's a huge kind of pivot for us, and obviously driven by our policy to support startups, but also our policy more and more to get startups to scale. So that's on the direct side. Then, Cathal, on the indirect side, we obviously, through Jean's department, we work very closely with the venture capital community in Ireland. So we do that through a number of schemes. So our last scheme was the 2019 to 2024 scheme, where Enterprise Ireland was allocated a budget of 175 million. And that was then to, in some instances, seed new VCs, and in other to go in again to existing VCs, and to ensure then that they have the fuel to invest indirectly into startups and scaling companies. And as Jean said, one of the key policy motivations for doing that is our 175 million would crowd in at least 10 times that amount of private capital when you're looking at the LP structures of Irish venture.
It's incredible to hear that language from yourself, Jean, earlier on that it's not the type of language you expect from government departments. It's that level of risk. I don't think if you sat and had a panel discussion with the Department of Transport that you'd have Jean's equivalent advocating risk. It's just not normal. And I have to commend many of the initiatives because they do acknowledge that risk is is a component of innovation.
If I might just come in, the risk of not taking a risk is
Exactly.
higher.
Exactly.
Because look at the money people are leaving on the table, look at the opportunities by being risk averse.
Yes, yeah. Incredible to think. And just in terms, Leo, when Jean mentioned earlier about not blowing our own trumpet, I'm paraphrasing here, but that we haven't highlighted many of the successes and the opportunities for that co-funding piece. Is that something that you see now as the next wave of opportunity for Enterprise Ireland to be able to push that out even further to the next wave of partners and funders, not the companies themselves, but the investment community?
Yes, so in terms of blowing our own trumpet, we probably do that in terms of our activities and the data. So, PitchBook would have Enterprise Ireland as one of the top 2 or 3 investors globally by volume. And that includes private sector and other government bodies. So, that's quite impressive. And if you think about it, the reason we're such a large investor is because we have the companies and the entrepreneurs with the ambition to take a risk that we can then co-partner with them to share that risk. So it's driven by the activities on the ground, which is really, really positive. In terms of our seed and venture capital, at this stage, when we go out for a call, we would be inundated with applications. So for every VC that we can fund, there's at least 10 other applications on top of that. And they're international. We have a mix in terms of our portfolio of first-time venture capital companies, then those that we're following on, and those that are international but would have a focus on supporting Irish companies.
Okay. I mean, one of the interesting things yesterday, Martin alluded to it in his earlier comments about the innovation team. What was the name of the team in Northern Trust yesterday? In the basement? In the lab. The level of innovation that they're doing is akin to 10 startups or 20 startups, but they're actually doing it within companies. Are you seeing that type of in-company spin out as well as an avenue for yourself, Leo, to support?
So obviously the high potential startups. So these are are startups which have significant innovation behind them. We would get a large number of promoters, of founders, coming from FDI and from international companies here. So we've a really good mix of those homegrown entrepreneurs who come up through the system, like the New Frontiers and other accelerators, that are in Irish companies that are acquired and then spin out, and then we have people who are in multinationals that come into our HPSUs. So it's very diverse. And what you'll see is when we talk about risk, we don't have a concentration risk in terms of one or two sectors. We're right across ICT, we're right across life sciences, and then we're into food and technology. So you've got a really good diverse range of entrepreneurs in Ireland that are looking at very specialist niche areas, but within a broader category of industry.
I mean, to finish on that, one of the things when you work in the area of consultancy that I have done for years, you get to talk to businesses at a different level. And many of them, how they talk about the Department of Enterprise and Enterprise Ireland, they don't see them as state agencies. They actually see them as effectively shareholders. As like partners is even too general. They regard themselves as, almost on the same journey together. And that's an incredible thing to say, because that works both ways. And if you go on to our next panelist, Colin Moran, he's head of lending with the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland. I mean, this topic is exactly in the sweet spot of why you were established, how you're measured, and how ultimately people will judge the success of what you're doing. So you might just set that context for us, some of the milestones today, because
Sure.
They've been really impressive, but not dissimilar to the Enterprise Ireland journey. You've done your job so well, many people haven't looked at you doing your job. As is often the case when the job is done well. Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And just good morning, everyone. Just to explain the background to the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, we were established in 2014 in the wake of the financial crisis as Ireland was emerging from that. And at that point, the Irish banks were in difficulty. They were struggling to access reasonably priced finance that they could then on-lend to SMEs. So that was the original idea of the SBCI. We sourced cheap funding from government sources and from EU sources and passed that on to the banks, and the benefit went to the SMEs. Over the 10 years since then, the model has evolved. We work very closely with Jean's Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and we've probably become more known for our guarantee schemes over the last few years. First of all, supporting Irish businesses through Brexit, then we had COVID, and more recently the Ukraine crisis as well. So the way the model works, what we do, we've two routes to market. On our guarantee schemes, we generally provide an 80% guarantee to the on-lenders, and that on-lenders is a mix of the pillar banks. We've 10 non-bank lenders, and then we also work with the credit unions as well. We guarantee them 80% of the loans they lend out to SMEs, and that encourages them to keep funding, even in counter-cyclical times when the economy is tougher. I think probably when we think about today's topic and scaling and export markets and so on, I think one of our key things is our growth schemes as well, which is for investment lending. And that's, again, done in conjunction with the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. When you look at the value, I think, that we bring to it, when you think about scaling business, and we were mentioning UL and software business and tech businesses, many of them won't, well, all of them really, won't have traditional bricks and mortar security that the banks like. So that's where the 80% guarantee that we provide really helps them lend to those companies. We also provide longer term finance as well, so that's from 7 to 10 years. So again, that's typically beyond the price or the terms that the banks will do. So that helps with the repayment capacity for those companies that are looking to invest. Maybe it's in export markets, maybe it's new product development, research and development, and so on. And then also the benefit of the guarantee is that it brings down the cost of finance. It reduces the bank's capital cost, so therefore the SME gets better pricing on that.
Because one of the things which I've heard said is that the mere existence of the Strategic Banking Corporation assists the non-bank lenders participate. So it's not because of each other, but you benefit from each other, which in turn benefits the broader investment community because they can look to the scale of deals that are happening. Any specific targets? I know the Minister mentioned the trade target in terms of the 100 billion figure. Any specific targets from within your own sector that you're looking for the next couple of years?
Yeah, and just to add to the point on non-banks, I think that has been absolutely crucial to us and our role in that. Obviously in the last 18 months we've seen Ulster Bank and KBC depart the market. They were an important source of finance for the SMEs. So I think it is important for everybody to be aware the growth of that non-bank market in Ireland and the range of options that are there in the asset finance, invoice finance, small business loan finance players like Link Finance and so on, and then even in the private debt market like the likes of Dunport and Beachpoint. There are plenty of options for scaling companies there, not just the pillar banks. But in terms of targets, I suppose our ambition is to deploy the two big schemes that we have at the moment. So again, with DETI, we have a 1.2 billion Ukraine credit guarantee scheme, which is available now from 17 non-lenders, and one or two more non-bank lenders to launch over the next few weeks. We launched Link Finance, an important player there, last week. And then the Growth and Sustainability Scheme is a 500 million scheme that we launched in Q3 last year. We have 3 banks out at that at the moment. We have Bank of Ireland, AIB and Finance Ireland, and we've 2 more to come in the coming weeks. So again, that's a key pillar of our strategy.
Fantastic, Colin. And yes.
I could come in quickly. SBCI is another great example of a pivot because they were set up in the wake of the financial crisis to provide liquidity to the banks, because as you'll probably remember, we were in a credit crunch and a cash crunch, and they've pivoted really successfully into these loan guarantee schemes, which have completely transformed the way we can get funding and supports to small businesses and to businesses without collateral. Yeah. So it's another lovely example of strategic thinking.
Yeah, and just to add to Leo's point and Jean's about the risk, what we now have is 10 years of data on the risk. So we're able to think about the next generation, larger ticket sizes, and we can price the guarantee fees for that risk better. And I think what's very interesting when you look at the data over the last 10 years, our defaults or our claim rates have been lowest from the growth schemes, the scaling businesses. So I think that's great data for us to move forward with new schemes.
I think Alan and others would probably say that they were left with the basket case to correct, and you got a clean slate, and you also got a policy landscape with the action plan on jobs that I know Mary Mitchell O'Connor and Richard Bruton, that plan almost turbocharged the innovation that Jean talked about, because it actually required the establishment and the funding and the partnerships, because that's been quite interesting. I'd like to move on to Margaret Lawler. Margaret is from the Tech Transfer Office within UL, and I suppose one of the things which is interesting is about on a day-to-day basis, you might just give us an idea of how you operate and how some of these questions in terms of scaling and funding interact with yourself, Margaret.
So I work in the Tech Transfer Office at the University of Limerick, and it was interesting to hear Pat earlier on. So we see ourselves as an important partner in the region. We're an educator, but we're also, we work with the IDA when they're bringing FDI companies in, and in fact, our students and access to our talent, and particularly the talent, both our students and our researchers, has been important in attracting companies into the area. I suppose another role I have is we work with companies in the local area, but also internationally. So we work with the large multinationals. We also work with the startups and small companies. We do collaborative projects with them. Our students do secondments and do co-op with the companies in the area. And in fact, most multinationals that come into the area have often had University of Limerick students placed in the company before they come to the region. Or we've even had collaborations with companies before they move into the region. Another area I work in is with our startups. So I'm a customer of Enterprise Ireland, and we're very lucky because we're very lucky in Ireland to have Enterprise Ireland and to have the IDA, because I've worked with startups and in startups in the US, the UK and now Ireland, and the supports that are available are incredible. Ready for the markets, we're ready to scale up. So we have filed patents in Japan, in China, to help our spin-outs grow so that they can manufacture or sell into these markets. So we work, and Enterprise Ireland would be, an important partner in helping us develop these strategies with our spin-out companies. So I suppose our office plays many roles in both supporting the local area to attract in large companies, but also creating these entrepreneurial companies. I think 8 of our companies in the last number of years have been high potential startups. Many of them, we've had companies actually that have successfully grown and scaled and been acquired by US and Japanese companies. So
That's fascinating, and that partnering approach is incredible, where in many ways, if someone is looking at a company, a startup that has come through that partnering approach with you, you'll probably have them better protected from a funding point of view, better protected from an IP point of view, and you would hope that then benefits them as they scale themselves and as they take on additional funding opportunities.
But they also, working in the university in this region, because of the large multinationals, even our startup companies are getting access and support, mentoring from these. So I think it is all about collaboration. It's about networking, collaborating, and having an environment, around Limerick where you mentioned, Pat, that you can pick up the phone and people will find you the solution or find you the person to speak to. And it's really nice to be in an area where we do this all the time in the tech. My job half the time is finding that person to speak to. And it's really nice when you live in an area where you can just pick up the phone to a multinational, going, do you know anybody in this? Can you help us? Can you mentor this company with their regulatory affairs, with their, what's the best way for them to grow and scale? And we do this all of the time, and I think it's probably what's really unique to here, and I've worked in quite a few areas, but this real sense of collaboration, and we're in this together, so everybody does help each other, and
Great.
That's really nice.
Thank you, Margaret. I want to move on to Conor O'Sullivan, who's Investment Director with Atlantic Bridge. And many of you will know Atlantic Bridge. Just in your opening remark, you might just give us an overview of the journey to date. But crucially, one of the things which we spoke about last week is about your new investment vehicle, the partnerships that you've signed in Asia, and some of the scaling that you're actually doing with some of the Irish companies into the Asian markets.
Thanks, Carl. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So Atlantic Bridge is a global investor in deep tech companies. One of the leading deep tech venture capital investors in Europe. We invest right from the very early stages, so working with spin-out companies from Irish universities. That's where I spend most of my time, and work very closely with Margaret and technology transfer teams right across the country, as well as Enterprise Ireland, to find the next generation of innovative companies here in Ireland, and then to help them grow and scale. And what Atlantic Bridge is all about is the bridge model from Ireland to Asia and to the US and globally to very, very large markets in multiple different sectors that are strategic, looking at healthcare, climate technologies, food and agri-tech, and other deep tech hardware technologies. So we've been doing that, deploying that model for the last couple of decades. Have raised 8 funds now. As I said, right from the 2 early stage funds focused on spin out investments, and also, Carl, you alluded to the 2 funds, the China-Ireland Growth Technology Funds. So the 2 of those funds, 250 million euros raised. The Irish Strategic Investment Fund and China Investment Corporation, the key investors in those 2 funds. So in terms of some of the metrics around those, 20 plus companies, 1.5 billion of revenue in those companies in those 2 portfolios. Over 300 million has been invested into Irish companies, and there's been some incredible success stories.
Who should we be watching out for?
Well, there are certainly some up-and-coming companies, the ones that have gone before them in terms of some great Irish success stories that have scaled into Asia through those partnerships, include the likes of Movidius, which is acquired by Intel, Decawave acquired by Corvo both for around $400 million. Navitas is another company that's now one of the leading power management semiconductor companies that's based and IPO'd in the US, has significant customer base in Asia.
So they're the ones that you tell people that have happened.
Exactly,
So
and there are many.
What about the ones that are about to
There
happen?
are many coming behind it through the continued investment in those funds. We're seeing, particularly around sustainability and climate technologies, how important power management, for example, is. Lower power devices, consumer devices, within, for example, the smartphone market, industrial markets. There's one company that I'm on the board of here in Ireland. It's a University College Dublin spin-out that has some very strong partnerships in Asia, in Japan in particular, about enabling a lighter weight automotive and aerospace sector. So building in composites into the supply chain. And they have some huge electric vehicle customers. They're on the cusp of converting those into some very large industrial contracts. Seeing that kind of innovation come out of an Irish university that's now scaled to very global markets in some massive supply chains and bringing sustainability benefits. These are some of the key technologies and innovations that we're very focused on at Atlantic Bridge, finding them very early, scaling them right through to the growth stage.
And crucially, you've managed that partnering not just with the companies but with the state investment funds, which is, I guess it's transformative in terms of the scale of opportunity that you can deploy.
That's right. I mean, we were talking about networks and obviously, having those networks right across corporations that could potentially acquire those companies in the future, be customers, be supply chain partners. Working with government is incredibly important in terms of access to markets, scaling those companies from Ireland and from Europe and helping them establish bases in Asia. These are fundamental challenges to address, but also incredible opportunities for those companies to take advantage of. And having those relationships as an investor, building that network and that bridge model that we've been developing for the last couple of decades. A lot of investors talk about value add, right? It's a commonly used term in the venture capital market. That is incredibly important, and you really see the difference. I've worked in many venture capital firms over the last decade. You really see the difference in terms of those networks and relationships and how that can be brought to bear. Talking to CEOs of companies, they say, how do I take advantage of this opportunity? Where can those connections be made? And having an investor that can do that and can pick up the phone and make those calls is incredibly important, and we're in a very good position to do that.
Excellent. I want to move on to Dennis Barry, CEO of Innovate Limerick. It's the first of its kind. It's a designated activity company, a DAC, between the City and County Council here in Limerick and Enterprise Ireland. But crucially, when we look back at those kind of criteria for setting up a business, the very fact that you've called yourself Innovate Limerick, to me, is a wonderful statement of ambition. You didn't say manage Limerick, or you didn't say, formally established. It was innovate, because that doesn't just mean the here and now with a startup. It can be from existing enterprises that have to completely pivot, to Jean's earlier point. You might just talk us through some of the ambition you have, and also your career in Asia has been quite phenomenal. You probably have some lessons for us. It's predominantly been in India, but I think there's lots of that international activity that you'll bring back to this role now in Innovate Limerick. Dennis.
Okay, thanks, Carl. So I'm the recently appointed CEO of Innovate Limerick the last 3 months. Innovate Limerick is actually a strategic partnership already between Limerick City and County Council and Enterprise Ireland to drive innovation in the region. And that's true, whether that's through networks, through projects, through collaboration, through the event space we see here today, the Engine, the Collaboration Centre. We also have plans to build an accelerator so that companies can incubate and pre-incubate here, and then they can expand into the accelerator building. So there's all these plans, I suppose, going forward. And I suppose the main thing it is a strategic collaboration already between Limerick City and County Council and Enterprise Ireland. So we can, guide startups and scale-ups on where they need to go going forward. And also, I suppose what's recently been approved as well is that there's going to be a VC for Limerick and Clare, and that's been approved, so that's going to be located here in the building as well. So that's going to add to the support for the scale-ups and startups coming into the region. So if we go back maybe then to my previous experience, so I came from the private sector. I worked with Thomson Reuters for approximately 15 years. And in that role, I was manager of global operations. So that was basically database production of life science databases. So from there, I was tasked back in 2007, 2008 to actually migrate 400 roles over to India. And also we had to increase our market share. We had to increase the productivity. We had to increase the cost effectiveness. So I was tasked with migrating the 400 roles, but also training up another 1,000 staff over in India between. So we went and we looked at 2 sites. So we got, for disaster recovery purposes, we looked at Chennai and Hyderabad. And then it took approximately 6 months to train everyone, get everyone up to speed where they needed to be. Our 3 pillars then were quality, productivity, cost effectiveness. So I suppose the challenges of going to India, it was back then. It's great now that Enterprise Ireland and another government are setting up a one-stop shop with Ireland House in Mumbai. But back then that wasn't there, so we had to put boots on the ground. We had to go over, see who our partners were, go to all the different cities. All the different cities specialise in actually, the universities are specialised in different areas.
Yeah.
So for Bangalore, it specialised in technology, but life sciences then would have been in Pune, in Hyderabad and Chennai.
And when you look, I mean, you have your stakeholders or your shareholders sitting in front of you and beside you. So when you look out, if in 12 months' time, because this is a new role, a new opportunity, what are you saying is the success, is the KPI for Innovate Limerick?
Well, I think the KPI would be for an increase in the startups and scale-ups in the region. There's always more to do, as they say, but also in the creation of programme initiatives within Innovate that can support the business community and the business ecosystem going forward.
Okay. Leo, you might give us a couple of examples from within the overall portfolio of companies in Ireland that are really scaling in Asia, some that have done it or some that are doing it now?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, in terms of, companies scaling, like there's one here, Telegraph, which, has expanded and looking to grow. So, like, there's a huge number in the region. And, sorry, I'm not just talking about Asia, but just in general. So I think, if I kind of make the connection between, Asia and a scaling company, I think the most recent one is, Cubic Telecom and the investment from SoftBank. When you look at the journey that Cubic Telecom was on over the years, and Barry Napier has spoken about this, it's very much focused on going after large markets, going after key customers in those markets, and really showing incredible ambition and resilience to make sure that they actually get these deals over the line. And a huge amount of the ecosystem that is here in Ireland would have supported the company as well as abroad. The embassies and Enterprise Ireland, the idea, all of that connectivity and network really helps these companies when they're going into Asia.
Okay, thank you, Leo. Colin, in terms of you mentioned the Ukraine, how you're managing to protect businesses at their vulnerable point, I think has been an example that you have led with in terms of not just providing, as you said, funding, but creating schemes. And that's a really interesting innovation, because schemes themselves denote that there'll be a certain a certain period of their existence, as opposed to that one-off transaction. And that's the one thing that business will always say: we love a certain regulatory landscape or a funding landscape. They're less concerned maybe about the rates, but they're more concerned about that certainty. In terms of, you heard the Minister talking earlier about the planning legislation, that question of certainty, knowing that this scheme is going to be in place for 1, 2, 3, 5 years. How have you maximised that to benefit companies? Because that is a unique opportunity that you have as an entity.
Yeah, so I suppose we respond continuously to the changing market conditions. So we brought in the Brexit scheme obviously a few years ago. The COVID was a very particular one, and now the Ukraine credit guarantee scheme was to reflect the increase in input costs that a lot of Irish SMEs were experiencing due to the war in Ukraine and rapid inflation, and obviously a rising interest rate environment last year that was caused by that as well. So that scheme runs until the end of December, but once the customer draws down on it, they have access to up to 6 years of funding. The Growth and Sustainability Loan Scheme, which is the 500 million scheme I mentioned, that will run until June 2026, so funding is available there. And again, borrowers that can take 7 to 10 year terms on that. But just to go back to a local example here in Limerick, a business just a couple of kilometres away, Promec in the mechanical services engineering, they started in 2014, have taken funding supported by the SBCI from Bibby, and have grown from 3 staff to 64 now. So that's a great example, I think, of local businesses that can access this kind of funding and grow rapidly and scale rapidly.
So on that growth from 3 to 64, Margaret, what's the pinch, or what's the opportunity that you're seeing? Is it with the IP, or is it with the acquisition? Where are you kind of pointing the partners that you work with?
Oh, I think you have to look at everything. Every startup we work with, or every spin out we work with, you have to look what is their value and where do they want to go, because again it's about people. So the most successful spin outs I've worked with have been where you have a strong cohesive team with a good network and who are accessing good supports such as Enterprise Ireland provide. So I think it depends on the startup. But certainly, if you want to go, grow and scale and move to other territories, then I think you have to have strong IP. And look, and whether you're acquired or whether you partner. And in fact, a lot of our spin-outs, they do work, they look for partners. So when they go to Asia or they go to the US, they're looking for a good partner, someone who will help them to grow and scale, because they realise they don't have the local network, they don't have the local information. So it's really key for them to find the right partner.
Dennis, you and I sat through yesterday the incredible overview from the team within UL, not just from the students, but in terms of the real impact that the co-op placement and the internships are having. That must fill you with confidence as you take on this role within the business community here.
Yeah, it was amazing yesterday speaking with the students. A lot of them are founders already of their own companies, their own businesses. And it's going to be important really for Innovate Limerick to engage with the student body out there, and so that they actually can come from UL and to us in here to collaborate within the centre here for the programme initiatives as well that we're going to create going forward.
And finally, Conor, just the last question to you, and then I'll come back to Jean at the end. I'm fascinated with how you have not just called yourself a bridge, but you actually are a bridge. And one of the things was about that conduit for American companies. Martin mentioned this earlier in his comments about if you can make the companies here, for example, stickier, you could do that by expanding the remit past EMEA. But that opportunity that you have seized in terms of the American FDI, American investment community, partnering with Ireland to invest in Asia, is that something that we should be promoting more of?
Yeah, I mean, we've invested with many of the largest US investors in technology companies as our companies have scaled up over the years. So we have an incredible network there in terms of tier one co-investors. Likewise in Asia, now 30 plus, again, some of the largest investors in China and elsewhere in Asia in technology companies. So bringing those two together is incredibly important to the journey of all of our companies, and we can be that link and that understanding between both sides of the world in terms of that understanding in technology companies.
A real bridge, yeah. Thank you, Conor. Final word and comment from Jean. Are you more optimistic than you were the COVID period? Did we get some of the enterprise policies right that allow us to grow quickly in the post-COVID environment? And how confident are you in terms of the next wave of scaling out of Ireland?
Well, when people talk about me, they say ever the optimist, so I'm always optimistic and confident. But I think we put a lot of very good building blocks in place. I think SBCI are a really important linchpin of the credit market. I think Enterprise Ireland are doing really great things, and the focus there is on scaling. But importantly, also, innovation is at the heart of government policy, and it drives everything we do. So we don't just want to grow Irish companies, we want to grow Irish innovative companies. We don't just want Irish companies to export, we want innovative companies to export and grow and dominate their markets. So that's always been a core principle of government, and yes, I am very optimistic that the future is bright.
Well, ever the optimist, we finished on time. It is exactly 12 noon, and nobody had to cut off the microphones. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation and all the panelists, not just for their enthusiasm, but actually for sharing of so much knowledge and information. And ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for our expert panel.